So, have you ever wondered if Unraid can be installed on a Raspberry Pi? Let's find out. So, what do you do if you're a nerd and you're not allowed to go out the house? Well, you try and install Unraid on the Raspberry Pi, of course. So when I've been browsing online, I've often seen that question asked. People saying, can I run Unraid on a Raspberry Pi? And the answer is always no. So I just figured it'd be kind of fun to see if we can try anyway. So a while ago, I bought myself a Raspberry Pi 4, the version with the 4 gigs of RAM. And I put that in a fancy gold coloured heatsink case that I managed to pick up off Amazon. So this is the Raspberry Pi 4 specs. And so now let's look at the minimum specs required to run Unraid. Okay, so we need a 64-bit capable processor of 1 GHz or better, along with at least 2 GB of RAM. So on the surface, everything looks like it should work. However, there's one very fundamental thing. The Raspberry Pi's CPU architecture is ARM, and Unraid needs a 64-bit x86 CPU. And because of this reason, Unraid won't run on a Raspberry Pi. Well, it won't run natively anyway. But maybe we can get Unraid to work if we emulate the x86 CPU using qemu. So my plan is to install the ARM64 version of OpenSuse. And so after installing that OS on the Pi, to then install qemu and virt-manager and see if we can emulate an x86 CPU and install Unraid on the Pi. Now, for those of you out there who don't know what qemu is, well, it's an open source emulator that performs hardware virtualization. Now, when we run our VMs on Unraid, we actually use qemu along with kvm to create our VMs there too. So any of you guys who have used a VM on Unraid will have used qemu as well. Now I just want to say, I'm not going to do like a really detailed tutorial of how to get all of this working. I'm just going to show you the steps that I did when trying to get Unraid working on the Raspberry Pi. So if you feel you want to have a go and do it as well, then you can. But I wouldn't recommend to anyone wanting to run a proper Unraid server on a Raspberry Pi. This is really just a kind of experiment just for fun. Okay, so to get this project started, I'm going to install OpenSuse. But I don't want to have to install it on an SD card. I want to install it on a USB stick instead. But, and yeah, there's always a but, isn't there? Well, on Raspberry Pi 3, it was pretty easy to install on a USB stick. But on the Raspberry Pi 4, USB boot isn't in the EEPROM yet. Now that is something that's going to be added additionally, and I believe they've actually put network boot in, but at the moment, when I'm making this video, USB boot isn't integrated as yet. So what I'm going to use is something called Berry Boot. And what this basically does is allow you to boot a loader off the SD card and then install and boot multiple operating systems from either a USB stick or even an external hard drive. Now Berry Boot's really easy to use. You just download the version for your Raspberry Pi, mine being the 4, I downloaded that. Then you just extract the files and copy all of those extracted files. Then plug your SD card into the computer. We're going to need to format it as FAT32. I'm going to title mine Berry Boot. So after you've formatted your SD card, you just want to open it up, and then copy all of those files that you just extracted into the root of the folder. So after preparing the flash drive, we just need to put it in the Raspberry Pi, plug in a USB stick into the USB 3, and also we're going to need a keyboard, so you can see I've plugged in my Logitech keyboard into one of the USB 2 ports. Okay, so here's me booted into Berry Boot for the first time. I'm going to choose a wired connection, and then here I'm going to format the flash drive in ext4. And with that done, I'm just going to choose OpenSuse from the operating systems here. I'm going to select it, then click OK to install. Then after installing it, I'm going to boot straight up into the operating system. Once here, now I'm going to update all of the packages by opening up terminal and typing sudo zipper update. And after everything's finished, I'm just going to give it a quick reboot. And now back into OpenSuse, I'm going to open the terminal window and install some things for the VMs to work. So I'm going to type in sudo zipper install qemu-uefi-aart64. That will install our qemu package. We need libvirt as well, so I'm going to put a space, then libvirt. and then lastly virt-manager, so I'm going to put space then virt-manager. It takes a real long time to install all of this. What you're seeing here is just massively sped up. Okay, after it's installed, I'm just going to restart the libvirt service, then quickly start up virt-manager just to check everything's working. So virt-manager is opening, so that's good. Sorry about that, it's a bit off camera here. Let me just pull it into focus. Now I was thinking here of just actually trying to install Unraid straight away, but I thought to myself it would probably be a good idea to actually overclock the Raspberry Pi just to try and get the most performance that I could. So before rebooting to overclock the Raspberry Pi, I just decided to create a file that I was going to need later. And here you can see I'm creating a dummy file here, just a dummy text file that I'm calling dummyiso.iso. And you'll see why I need that later on after we've rebooted and overclocked the Pi. So let's do that now. So back in Berry Boot, I'm going to click on Edit Menu. Overclocking is really simple in Berry Boot. Just click Edit Config, and then go to Config TXT. So to overclock, first I'm going to overvolt the Pi. So that's why here I'm typing over_voltage equals 5. And underneath that I'm going to set the frequency to 2000 using the command arm_frequency equals 2000 here. With that done, I'm just going to click onto OK, then reboot the Pi into OpenSuse. Now here I'm installing some network bridge tools using the command sudo zipper install bridge-utils. Because I'm going to need to set up a network bridge to use with the VM in a moment. So with the bridge tools installed, I can now create a network bridge. So I'm going to type YAS2, bringing me into the YAS control center, and then from here I'm going to click onto network settings, then click onto add, and device type I'm going to choose bridge. Next here I'm setting a dynamic IP address. I want things on the bridge to be assigned an IP address from my router. DHCP version I'm just choosing 4 only. And now here I'm choosing the device where I want the bridge to be connected to, so I'm choosing the Ethernet adapter here. Okay, so the network bridge is all set up, so now I can open up virt-manager and try and install Unraid. Because I rebooted earlier, I'm just restarting the libvirt service. This is always necessary after a reboot. Okay, so now I'm just going to stop here a moment, because on the Raspberry Pi now I plugged in the Unraid USB stick, and I plugged the Unraid USB stick into the Raspberry Pi's USB 2 port, not the USB 3. And into the Raspberry Pi's USB 3 port, I plugged in this USB kind of hard drive caddy thing where I could fit in two 2TB hard drives. So in virt-manager, I just chose to create a new VM. I chose local install media, and then I changed the architecture options here away from Arch64 to x86-x64, and then click forward. Now this is where I chose that dummy file that I created earlier, because I'm not actually going to install anything from a CD or anything like that. I just needed something for virt-manager to think that I was going to do that. So next here, because my Pi's got 4 gigs of RAM, I thought I'd give it 2.5 gigs. So I put in 2500 here. And for CPUs, I chose 3 virtual CPUs. I didn't want any VDISC, so I didn't enable the storage for this VM. I gave the VM a name, obviously Unraid. And then I tick the checkbox here, customize configuration before install. Then looking at the network selection here, I'm using the bridge that I created a moment ago. So with that, I can just click on to finish. And now I can see the full configuration of the VM. For chipset, I went with i440FX and I left the firmware on BIOS. For the virtual CD drive here, I totally removed that bit of virtual hardware. I don't want any extra overheads at all. Next, I needed to add some hardware. I needed to pass through the Unraid USB stick, and also I needed to pass through that USB caddy holding those 2 2TB hard drives. Okay, and finally I need to change the boot option so it actually boots from the USB 3 stick, from the Unraid one here. Okay, so hopefully that should be everything and it should work when I click begin installation. But yeah, of course it didn't work. What happened was the USB 3 drive that I was passing through, the one with the 2 2TB drives, it didn't like that and it needed to be put on a USB 3 bus. So I just changed the controller type from USB 2 to USB 3. And this time clicking on begin installation, it did actually work. And hey, the Unraid boot menu, on a Raspberry Pi of all things. Now don't be fooled, although it looks pretty fast here, the boot process took absolutely ages, at least 5, maybe even 10 minutes. I just sped it up massively to stop you from hitting that dislike button about 100 times for making you go through it all. But eventually it did boot up and I got an IP address, so let's type that into a browser and see what happens. Okay, cool. So far so good. We're in Unraid. Let's assign some disks. Now I'm only going to assign 2 data drives. I'm not going to assign parity because that's going to just stress the processor even more. We've got to be at least a little bit kind to that little bitty Raspberry Pi. So with the drives assigned, let's start up the array. Now everything that I'm doing here in the web UI is all really sped up. Don't think it's this fast, it just isn't at all. But eventually the array got created and I thought then after that I'd try and create a couple of shares and copy a file into one of those shares. So I quickly, or should I say slowly, made 2 shares. You can see them both here. So over on my Mac VM I connected to one of the shares. Then once connected I tried copying over quite a large file, 3.79 gigs. And yeah, it really did struggle, taking just over the estimated time that it reckons here of 42 minutes. Now just before wrapping up this video, let's go to the Raspberry Pi Unraid dashboard. I'd actually increased the RAM here to 3 gigs instead of the 2.5 that we had before. There's no file transfers going on or anything at all. The Unraid Pi is totally idle, well it should be, but the CPUs are being pegged out at 100%. And we can see the frequency of the CPU, we see that the overclock did work. It's running at 2000 MHz here. Yeah, it's a shame that all of the CPUs are being totally pegged out. To be honest, I was hoping for some better performance than what I got. I was really hoping that it would be able to handle some kind of basic NAS duties, but really it just couldn't do it. Well, the Pi 4, I guess it did try, and it was actually able to run Unraid and create an array. You know, I wonder if that's the first time Unraid's ever run on a Raspberry Pi. Well, although it's pretty pointless to actually run Unraid on a Pi as you can see from this, maybe this tutorial's given you some ideas of how to actually set up virt-manager and be able to install other VMs on a Raspberry Pi. Maybe try installing things like Windows 98, Windows XP and maybe even Windows 7. But anyway, that's the end of this video and I really hope you enjoyed following my journey of trying to get this done. If you did, then please just take a moment and hit up that like button. And if you're not already a subscriber, then please subscribe to the channel. And to all of my patrons and supporters out there, a huge thanks to all of you guys for making these videos possible. I really do appreciate all of your support and help. And guys, I really do hope all of you out there are staying safe. And if you're kind of in a lockdown like I am here in my country, I hope you're not getting too bored and you're finding things to keep you occupied. For me, as my work's kind of got really quiet lately, I'm going to see if I can make even more videos over the next few weeks. So I'm going to do that and I think I'm going to finish off playing Half-Life Axel. I haven't played it that much, but what I have played of it, it seems a really awesome game. Don't know if you guys may have checked it out. Anyway, it's time for me to go now, so stay safe out there guys and I'll catch you in the next video.